神秘之夜同大家見，咁大家好奇怪啦，點解今日淨係得我一個？其實就唔係嘅，因為咧大家陣間會聽到一段訪問，就係一位相當之著名嘅人物啦，就係 Eisenhower。咁佢就同我同阿 Moon 一齊咧三個做節目，咁但係因為咧嗰個節目本身咧係英語進行嘅，咁所以我就需要喺呢度咧作一個簡短嘅介紹咧，用廣東話。個原因就係因為咧，我哋而家個時間相當之緊迫啦。大家知道啦，呢排喺香港發生好多事情，咁我自己咧就冇乜時間咧去做一啲後期嘅翻譯同埋字幕嘅工作。咁所以我哋就即係決定咧，就係將呢個節目咧原原本本咁播出嚟。咁但係之前咧，我就會加一個簡短嘅廣東話介紹。咁到稍為得閒啲嘅時候咧，其實我就會將呢個節目咧入邊呢位嘉賓 Eisenhower 咧，佢講嘅説話咧，我哋將佢譯成字幕嘅。咁嗰個節目亦都有包括埋中英文啦，咁啊方便大家去對照。咁但係 anyway 咧，就係呢位嘉賓係一個相當之重量級嘅人物嚟嘅。個原因好簡單，你聽個姓都知啦，就係已故嘅美國總統艾森豪威爾嘅曾孫女。咁佢今次係第一次嚟香港嘅，咁亦都好有榮幸咧，我哋係即係透過阿 Moon 嘅關係，可以請到佢上嚟同我哋做訪問啦。咁佢嗰個背景係好值得大家去留意嘅。而事實上，大家喺之前嘅神秘之夜都聽過我介紹，咁所以但係我今日仍然要做一個好簡單嘅介紹咧，即係等大家知道點解我哋要請佢上嚟。艾森豪威爾總統咧，就喺美國即係第二次世界大戰之後嘅一位相當之著名嘅軍人出身嘅總統啦。咁喺佢卸任之後就到甘迺迪㗎啦。咁喺佢卸任之前咧，其實佢講一番説話。咁喺個電影入邊咧 ，JFK 啊，即係 Oliver Stone 導演嗰個關於甘迺迪暗殺案嘅開頭嗰度咧，都有提及佢一個卸任前嘅一個演説。佢特別提到咧，就係美國係受到好可能會受到一個所謂 military industry complex 啊，即係個軍事同埋工業嘅綜合體咧所控制嘅。咁其實呢番説話都好耐人尋味，因為即係當然大家都唔好聽得明佢講咩。咁但係慢慢咧，如果從一個即係所謂陰謀論或者一個外星人嘅角度咧，慢慢可以理解呢個即係事情係點解啦。咁至於佢嘅曾孫女咧，佢亦都好強調一樣嘢，佢今日所得到嘅資料涉及到呢啲陰謀論，涉及到呢啲外星人嘅資料，就唔係嚟自佢嘅家族嘅，係佢自己本身喺一個好細嘅年紀嘅時候咧，有一啲所謂超自然嘅經驗，而令到佢有一個咁嘅取向，而去追求呢種知識。咁如果你第一次接觸嘅話咧，你成日覺得係極度虛虛晃晃嘅。咁但係我覺得咧，即係大家可以用一個比較開放呢個態度去聽聽。個原因好簡單，就係基於佢自己本身家族嘅歷史嚇。因為以佢一個咁嘅家族嘅成員，佢去講呢番説話，自不免咧會受到好多人嘅攻擊、批評，甚至可能佢家族亦都會同佢疏離。咁但係如果你從佢自己嗰個簡介或者佢自己口中所講咧，其實佢同佢家族嘅關係仍然相當之良好嘅。咁換言之，可能佢嘅家族本身都起碼唔一定認同佢呢個講法，但係咧，就唔會話將佢當成一個即係神經失常啊，或者係完全不可理喻嘅家族成員去咁樣去睇法嘅。咁至於即係呢位羅拉艾森豪威爾小姐佢嗰個訪問嘅內容咧，其實涉及到相當之多角度嘅。咁我而家就盡量將佢好簡化講俾大家聽，就係有邊幾個重點，大家可以去理解。其一咧就係喺呢個1920幾年嘅時候咧， 其實喺美國或者其他先進即係當其時科技先進嘅國家已經同即係根據講法就係話已經同一啲外星人去簽訂咗嗰個條約嘅。咁呢個亦都牽涉到咧，就係我呢度講緊就係第二次世界大戰嗰個起因、過程同埋結果。咁佢提出一個講法就係同我哋喺歷史書上邊有相當之唔同嘅睇法，就係其實希特拉係俾一啲外星人咧係進行思想嘅控制嚇，佢亦都收到好多信息。咁佢就因為呢啲外星人要即係將以前一啲改造過嘅種族，佢哋要屠殺，咁先至做出一個即係咁瘋狂嘅行為。咁大家可以不同意呢個睇法嘅話，甚至覺得佢只係天方夜譚。但係即係你起碼如果聽咗呢個講話之後，你可以用另一個角度去理解呢段歷史。因為個原因就係因為咧，即係根據佢哋嘅睇法咧，就係第二次世界大戰係未完嘅。佢哋入邊嗰個幾個外星人嘅鬥爭喺地球嘅鬥爭咧，而家到即係都仍然係繼續緊嘅。咁亦都喺地球上邊咧，有好多相當之多嘅一啲即係外星人建立嘅一啲地下嘅堡壘啦，或者係工場。咁佢亦都有提到一位好著名嘅人物啦 Philip Schneider。咁我哋喺節目以前都提過，就係即係呢個條約，即係同外星人簽嘅條約本身咧，係經歷過一啲一啲爭端而導致一啲戰爭嘅。至於話嗰個外星人嘅種類咧，佢即係阿 Laura 亦都提到咧，就係其實呢個 Nordic 即係大家會即係想像到啲金頭髮嗰啲咧，就係同呢啲納粹黨有關嘅嚇。咁最重要一樣嘢佢提到咧，就係喺呢個外星嘅基因嘅改造過程入邊咧，有啲人類咧佢係殘餘咗一啲所謂爬行類啊，即係亦都我哋俗稱叫蛇咯 reptilian 嘅一啲意識或者基因喺入邊。咁當然啦，呢個如果你喺嗰個進化論入邊嚟講，我哋都係喺嗰個爬蟲論嘅進化過程入邊進化過嚟嘅。咁但係佢嗰個講法就係話咧，我哋譬如對外界嗰種侵略性，嗰種缺乏同理心嘅情況咧，係嚟自我哋一啲爬蟲類殘餘嘅一啲意識留咗喺我哋度。咁呢個係睇佢哋嘅講法嚟講咧，就係一啲關乎喺外星人對地球人做過一啲基因改造嘅一啲過程入邊嘅一啲例子嚟嘅。咁喺個訪問入邊，我亦都問過一個問題，就話如果一個咁天方夜譚嘅説法，你會唔會話呢啲所謂 reptilian 啊，呢啲爬行類或者蛇嘅人咧，佢哋會夜晚或者某段時間佢哋會變形咧？咁啊 Laura 答得好清楚，佢話佢自己冇見過嚇，但係佢唔排除呢個可能性。但係最終嚟講咧，就係呢種係一種意識嘅狀況，而唔係講話我哋係個人本身要變咗一條蛇。咁另外佢亦都提到一個咧，就係其實上咧佢喺幾年前啊，即係一段時間之前咧，就被邀請嚇或者被recruit 啦嚇，即係去火星長期居住。咁佢就拒絕咗嘅。咁佢哋亦都會話咧。呢啲去嘗試去做呢班人咧，係同呢個外星人有一定嘅聯繫。咁但係佢太喜歡地球啦，所以佢就拒絕咗呢一個咁嘅火星嘅移民計劃。咁到最嬲尾嗰陣時候咧，即係嗰個訪問嘅末段咧，我就會問佢咧，即係喺地球上邊，我哋而家有啲咩係對人類有最大嘅影響啊？舉個例啦，譬如我哋個天氣嘅變化啦。我哋嗰個科技嘅進展啦，特別係譬如話電腦、互聯網同埋手機。咁我亦都即係會問咗佢一個比較即係大家而家都關心嘅問題，就係 5G 呢個流動電話對人嗰個影響係點樣？咁佢似乎覺得就呢個唔係一個即係好似大家咁擔心嘅一個問題嚟嘅嚇。咁但係 anyway 咧，佢就會覺得咧喺而家呢個情況底下咧，好多係世界政府嘅精英，佢哋都有一個後備嘅計劃， 就係假如地球嗰個即係情況嚇，特別係講天氣啦，或者環境嘅問題係惡化嘅話咧，佢哋就會有一部分人咧就移居去咗其他嘅地方嚟嘅。咁可能其中一個移居嘅地方就係火星啦。咁所以咧，呢個亦都解釋到點解近年咧，即係以美國為首嘅政府或者其他政府咧，佢哋唔係太重視去面對或者處理呢個氣候變化嘅問題啊。咁 anyway 成個嘅訪問大概係1個鐘頭30分鐘度。咁而家我就即係將嗰個節目咧就cut 咗去呢個訪問個過程入邊。咁當然啦，即係喺呢個節目播出嘅時候咧，喺青年廣場，柴灣嘅青年廣場咧，亦都有一個UFO 嘅 Expo。咁入邊有好多相當之多嘅嘉賓嘅，其中係我相當之想見嘅，或者我今日有機會見到嘅就係一位相當之著名嘅意大利嘅 UFO 嘅專家 Roberto Pinotti。咁我哋亦都希望咧能夠喺佢未走之前咧，我哋能夠同佢做到一個訪問，去即係介紹一下梵蒂岡同埋 UFO 之間嘅關係。咁而家唔阻大家啦，咁我再提一提咧，就係呢個訪問嘅內容咧，我哋到適當嘅時間咧，我哋會將佢翻譯成即係廣東話，同埋有英文字幕俾大家去欣賞嘅。OK。
It is my greatest honor to have Miss Laura Eisenhower tonight as our guest.
我哋好榮幸請到羅拉艾森豪小姐嚟今晚。
You don't need to do the translation because we'll do the translation afterwards instead. So we go straight in English.
Oh, I just want to say hi to the
Okay.
Hello.
And can I address you as Laura?
Sure.
Okay. And as usual, Moon is here with us.
Yeah, we met in Beijing already.
Yeah.
Did.
So Laura, would you mind to do a bit of introduction of your background and why you are in Hong Kong this time?
Well, I've been involved in this sort of work for many, many years, and I've had the fortunate experience to be able to travel all over the world to talk about some of the things that I've learned over the course of time. A lot of it has been research. A lot of it has been my own personal experiences that started from a very young age. It started from a young age because I was born into the Eisenhower family, and early on I discovered that there was a lot of extraterrestrial and UFO sort of things going on with his administration, on top of a lot of things that were coming into me based on my own soul journey. And I began to connect a lot of dots. And around 2006, I got recruited to go off planet, and that is what sort of put me in the public eye. And I learned a lot about what was going on behind the scenes. And when I began to see the connection between that recruitment to go off planet to Mars and what took place in his administration, I started to speak about it, and a few journalists and people that were interested picked up on my story and began to give me more of a public forum. And ever since then, I've been traveling the world. I've been doing a lot of conferences in the United States, speaking about ET government treaties, and also, the fact that people are having contact and abduction experiences, and also a much larger picture connected to this ascension window period that we're in that has to do with the expansion of human consciousness and what all this means at the end of the day as far as where we're heading as a human race, and what our true potential is. And that's my favorite part of it, because there's a very, very positive message that is connected to a lot of things that might seem to some to be sort of maybe scary or confusing.
Oh, yeah. But people recognize you, I guess. The first one is that your family name, Eisenhower. So would you mind to explain a bit what is the relation between you and the family?
Well, yeah, President...
We translate.
No, we do it afterwards.
Oh, the dubbing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So President Eisenhower is my great-grandfather, and I grew up very close to the family. I did not know him personally, but he actually visited me when I was a child and helped me to understand the work that I'm here to do. And I found it very odd to have his presence with me. I did know his wife, Mamie, my great-grandmother, and I was with her when she transitioned. I knew her for a few years before she died. And Eisenhower's son, whose name is John S.D. Eisenhower, my grandfather, I spent a lot of time with and visited him every year until about 2011, 2012 when he transitioned. So I've always been close to the family, but there was not a lot of information that I was given about UFOs or ETs or anything along those lines. It was stuff that I found out on my own.
Until what age you start getting UFO in the picture?
Ooh, I was about 10 years old when I started to clue into the fact that there was something going on with the Eisenhower administration in terms of extraterrestrials. The first thing that I saw was a newspaper article when I was standing in the grocery store line with my mother, but it was a newspaper that was meant to be a joke, sort of like in a lot of different countries they have sort of the spoof sort of joke newspapers or magazines. So it was something that nobody would normally take seriously, but when I saw it as a child, I was like, I think that there's some truth to this.
When was that?
Probably...
She was 10 years old, right?
Yeah, so I would say it was like 1983. I was born in 1973. And I saw that, and I started to just feel really opened up into trying to like understand what that was all about. And I did a lot of research. I asked a lot of questions too, to family members, and they didn't give me a lot of information at all.
Well, you were 10 years old only. They're not going to tell you much, yeah?
No, and even later on in life, they still didn't tell me anything. So it's not because I feel that they wanted to keep it from me. I don't think they really knew. I think there was a lot of secrecy and compartmentalization and also a lot of threats, because around 1947, a lot of laws were put in place by the NSA and different three-letter organizations that put it into law that if you were to expose these sort of things, there would be huge ramifications. So I think Eisenhower was trying to protect his children and grandchildren.
I see. So are you the only one that in your family that had that kind of experience, or do you think...
There's nobody else in my family that talks about any of this. But we're all like a very close... Yeah. And I have a big mouth, and... So I've always been really curious, and I've had my own experiences. Like I said, in 2006, I was offered something that I turned down, but it helped me to connect a lot of dots. And, I'm still trying to figure out what it all means to this day. And it's not that my family's closed off. I mean, I feel very loved and accepted by them, but it's not anything that they have been given information about. And if they have, we're not very open about it because there might be things that are keeping them from being able to do that. But I sense that they don't really know. Okay. And because there's so much love and clarity and honesty between everybody that I'm not sensing that there's something that they're keeping from me.
Yeah, things have changed, but when you experience that kind of supernormal experience, did people call you weird at that time?
Yeah, I'm used to be calling weird.
We are still being called weird.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and so I think we're in a really critical place right now where humanity needs to open their eyes, and calling people crazy or weird is due to a sort of uncomfortableness with something that is beyond what they were taught in school or what was passed down to them, from their parents or, even society. And most of us aren't talking about this because we're just tapping into something beyond what most other people can comprehend. We're also listening to whistleblowers. We're looking at information. We're looking at data. A lot of what I express comes not just from me, but from clients that I have, from whistleblowers that I've come to know, and from a much vaster history that I've been willing to explore. And I'm an astrologer, and I also, read a lot of books based on galactic history that has not been given to anyone in the school system. So
I wonder what is this book about galactic history like?
Well, there are many.
I never read one. Maybe I came across one, but they're not named that way.
Right. Well, okay. There's the Voyagers connected to Keylontic Science and Oceania DN. And then there's
this Keylontic Science, this word, we were so hard in finding a translation for that. We looked through all kind of dictionary.
Yeah, no, that's a tough one.
Science, the study of what?
Our galactic history, what was originally called the Freedom Teachings, that was the root of a lot of the ancient texts that we hear about.
Okay.
That ended up getting altered because the Freedom Teachings, and I'm not like all for one thing that I read. I keep myself very like sovereign. I know that some things we might want to question, but from what I've come to understand is that these teachings got altered, and the original teachings had to do with soul alchemy and how we can be sovereign beings and connect to 0-point unified field and understand our DNA and our junk DNA, and how that is actually representative of harmonic universes that have been shut off to us. And that's why we've been in sort of this 3D Earth experience. And these higher harmonic universes are connected to other extraterrestrial races that have been interacting with humanity or not actually interacting, because we are in a very low density, and most of the interactions that we've been having are more from negative agendas that have been seeking to control us. And so it helps us to understand our higher selves, our more advanced DNA potential, and also how we've been locked into this sort of 3D matrix that has to do with lower forms of off-planet or even subterranean cultures that live underneath the earth, and these particular races that are trying to steer us onto artificial timelines to create more enslavement. And when we begin to open up to the truth of who we really are, we gain seniority over these lower entities because we're recognizing the fullness of what we're really made of. And that's really the basis of what my talks are about. And it's not so much like I've read all these books about Keylontic Science, but that was one of the few things that I was able to research that helped to validate some of the things that were coming into me when I was a child. Particularly being born into the Eisenhower family, it helped me to come to terms with the fact that, okay, Eisenhower's administration had contact with these different beings, but he also was able to relate to more benevolent beings. And there's, groups like the Guardians, and, if we trace it back to our greater history, there's so much more that took place before we ended up in this third density.
So you're saying the Eisenhower family actually, or Eisenhower, encountered with these more negative aliens and signed up all this treaty, but he also encountered the so to say good aliens as well.
I believe what I've come to understand is he encountered both. The more negative ones had already been creating treaties way before him. The Greada treaties.
Before him.
Oh yeah.
In America.
Yeah. So.
America? Oh.
Starting in 1926, actually, Phil Schneider, which is one of the first whistleblowers of ufology and things connected to extraterrestrials, said that.
You mean president before Eisenhower?
Roosevelt and also Truman, and he even mentions 1926. So we have to think of, well, what president was during that time? So the Greada treaties are supposedly renewed every 10 years. And by the time Eisenhower's administration came about, the three-letter organizations were already in place, so they considered it more of a surrender than a treaty. A lot of whistleblowers said that they weren't even making agreements, it was more a surrender, because Admiral Byrd had already tried to invade Antarctica because the bases there already had Nazis and all this ET technology, and that didn't go well. And then they flew UFOs over the White House in 1952 and intimidated them to the point where...
That was seemingly a great case, flying over the White House with radar record.
Yeah.
Seemingly.
Right. And then Project Paperclip happened in 1947, and all these different things took place where the Second World War is not what we know it to be. What we see in the history books is not actually the true story, because that war was not really ever won. And so when we look at Eisenhower as being a war hero, yes, in a lot of ways his heart was in the right place, but we had not gotten a grip on what was actually really going on in terms of, extraterrestrials and these particular, agreements and treaties. And so when Project Paperclip came about in 1947, before the ET government treaties took place, many whistleblowers have said that it was because of this infiltration that these visitations took place. One of the first visitations was with the Nordics, but they were already being told that the Nordics were not a positive group. They were still connected to the Nazis.
So it's some kind of bad Nordic group.
Excuse me?
Some kind of bad Nordic group. Because we always say Nordic groups are good
right.
guys.
And that was really confusing because that group might have been positive, but they had so much suspicion that they weren't able to come up with an agreement. And because of that, this other group came in and they presented themselves as being a dying race and that they needed our help so that they wouldn't, die out. But this treaty was carrying over. Supposedly, the first agreement, or at least the most major agreement, was with Winston Churchill, Aleister Crowley, and Hitler. And Hitler was supposedly, and I say supposedly because everybody, needs to take it with a grain of salt. Hitler was mind controlled through the Tavistock Institute and pushed into this agreement in order to create genocide to protect a certain race that they thought was going to be the ruling race. It was the most advanced race.
Very Hitler.
Yeah.
Topic.
Yeah, and the whole eugenics thing and we're the superior race. They felt like it was good. But it got out of control because there were other races involved. So the Nordics and the Nazis didn't quite work out and ended up being the Nazis and the Draco reptilians, which have been a huge issue in our galactic history for thousands and thousands of years. For a certain point in time, it seemed like the Nordics and the Dracos were in an alliance. And so the question is, were the Nordics that were presenting themselves to Eisenhower the more positive faction or the ones that were originally a part of, that agenda? And so they were confused and there were a lot of different viewpoints about it. And they couldn't come up with an agreement. And then the Greys came along, but a lot of whistleblowers like Gerald Light and, gosh, if I could remember all their names, so that there were 4 different beings that presented themselves.
Okay, the Greys, the Nordic, the Drago.
And the reptilian.
And the reptilian, and then the EBEs, the extra biological entities that were more cloned. And this all carries over from the Orion Wars. So in my talks, I don't quite tackle the full subject of what happened during that time, but I go back into the galactic history of how our DNA got compromised and how all these higher levels of our DNA connect to these higher harmonic universes and all these original galactic wars, so that in the here and now, where we are as a humanity, we can begin to look at ourselves and begin to solve these issues instead of relying on our governments. Because ever since Eisenhower and Kennedy administration, most of the leaders of our countries have been overtaken or compromised, and they're very difficult to trust and count on. We're dealing with a lot of mind control and MK Ultra and multi-generational mind control and abuses with these 13 families that we know of as
multi-generational. What is that?
Abuses and, well, it's like the hybrids, right? So if we go back to our galactic history and we look at what became the ruling classes, they had a certain makeup that revealed that they were highly advanced, but they also had reptilian DNA. And so it was like a hybrid of like highly advanced as far as spiritually speaking, or like connected to like Lyra or the Orpheum consciousness that gives them a more advanced position. But because they were mixed with the reptilian DNA, they were easily overtaken. Now, most humans have the highly advanced potential, but if they could use a certain group to control humanity, then they could use it as a food source, because it goes back to these ancient wars of domination and rebellion that turns into domination, because we're in a free will universe. So the whole idea of power has come into the picture. The misuse of power. How is a person going to play with power? So it's very hard in a free will universe for everybody to use power in a divine way without needing to go through some sort of growth or lessons. And so we dropped into this density to experience reincarnation, to understand the use of power, but certain control groups don't care about learning the right use of power. They want to remain the controllers.
It takes wisdom.
Yeah, and some races don't care about that. They would prefer to stay in charge. I'm sorry.
I think that the weather is not quite good. The air is not good, so then you can just call. Are you okay? When you are talking about reptilian, do you mean that during some time in nighttime or in some other time they will change their shape into a snake or something like that?
We say the queen changed shape.
I do feel that there's. I do feel that the 13 families is a hybrid race that can easily be targeted to turn into reptilians. And
The 13 controlling race, the rich races.
Yes, and they branch off. And I do feel that they have this genetic compatibility to these off-planet groups that want to control humanity that take them over. And it doesn't mean that they want that. So we don't want to necessarily blame the humans, but from what I've come to understand with certain interviews that I've done with people that have been involved in it, is that they can snatch out a person's consciousness and put a reptilian in there, and that's why they do these ritual abuses, and that's why they do things that are so foreign to us. So it's kind of like saying if we were a hybrid of like a kangaroo, right, and we were pulled out of our body and this other consciousness came in, that we would actually be this other being for a little while and then come back to a human form again. And so there's compartmentalization, and the trauma-based mind control creates alters where you can be dealing with somebody that's connected to this sort of scenario where they might be oblivious to it and they might seem like a personal, like a reasonable person and a good person. But then there's this other influence that comes in and uses them to does that make sense?
I feel people like this. Is in split second they are somebody else, something else, and in split second they are back.
And they don't necessarily know this.
Right.
And that's why when we get really angry at these agendas, we have to realize that, a lot of humans that might hold positions of power don't really recognize what's actually happening. And that's something we need to overcome as a humanity, because it ends up creating these control systems that we buy into. And if we can starve these systems, we can help these souls to choose their higher aspects. They're using them so that we buy into it, give our power away, whether it's religion, government, the medical industry, or the Hollywood industry.
Education.
And exactly. But it doesn't mean everybody that's a part of it is negative. It just means that we need to start to understand what we're made of so that we can come together in unity and rise above it and utilize the best gifts that we all carry instead of have this other force come in to feed. Because most individuals in humanity are by nature good. And even the ones that are being taken over by these entities by nature are good. And they, so it's sort of like a form of possession. So when people look into the paranormal world and they see ghosts or entities,
possession, yes.
Yeah. So we need to understand that when we can come together and recognize what's going on, we can help expel these beings so that we can focus on the best of ourselves. Because humans don't realize that they're in a trance of a mind control that comes from the artificial intelligence that these beings want to bring in. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Let's go back what you mentioned. I guess it is more about consciousness than shape. When you're talking about reptilian, you mean reptilian consciousness instead of having a shape of a snake.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people say that they actually do shapeshift into these forms. I personally have never seen it, but if we look at it from a consciousness level, it's going to target that part of humans, because we all have a reptilian brain, we all have mammalian, we have right and left brain, and these agendas are really trying to addict us to a matrix that keeps us from being able to ascend into the fullness of who we really are.
I have a naughty question.
Sure.
How is that reptilian brain like? No left and right?
It's more instinctual, and it seems to be more aggressive and more like wanting to dominate. So to me, I look at it like the negative ego of ourselves, where we just want to win and we don't care about anybody else. And it's just, the thing is, we're in a very fragmented humanity, and we can look at all these different races as separate from us, but they all represent aspects of us. And when we can integrate it into wholeness, that reptilian energy actually has its place. But when it's the thing that's trying to rule and take over others, then it suppresses higher consciousness. So we all have to look at ourselves, because to me, we win the war within ourselves by doing the inner work, by understanding where have we hooked into that agenda. If there's a reptilian agenda, where have we bought into it? Where do we want to dominate and win? So a lot of times we're unconscious, right? Because there's so many world wars, and we're taught to choose sides. We're taught to fear other races. We're taught to have gender inequality, or thinking that this is how we should raise our kids. And it's because we've been taught this, and it's something that is in our culture. It's embedded in society. So it's not our fault. It's just something that we pick up on, and we're taught that if you don't follow this, then you're either a failure or you're rebellious. And we're dealing with a galactic situation where rebellion is the reason behind it. So the question is, what operates this matrix? So when we look at the planetary energies, there's things like the Saturn moon matrix. There's manipulations that are taking place with dark technologies that actually manipulate the planetary consciousness.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this dark technology. We had that translated on the PowerPoint, and we have it on all the poster about this dark technology.
It creates reversals. So instead of being able to connect to the higher octaves of the planetary consciousness, we operate on the lower levels. So the lower level of Saturn is control and domination. And it's actually, that's why the word Saturn and Satan are connected. And it creates sort of a vampiric system where it feeds on individuals, and it takes their power in order for it to be in power. The higher levels of Saturn, as far as astrology is concerned, is teacher master. So when we overcome these obstacles, we actually learn to become teachers and masters, like self-mastery. And we're kind of put in this experience to rise above these obstacles. If we don't rise above the obstacles, we are enslaved by them. If we don't feel the ambition to overcome them, then they feel like things that are constantly attacking us, and we become victimized by it. But when we can look at it like a warrior or an athlete, then we take on the challenge, and we keep jumping over the hurdles until we recognize that we're actually fully sovereign, and we don't have to be limited by these things. So it takes a lot of self-determination and willingness to not be limited. And because we're conditioned as children, it's very difficult, because the school systems, our society, our parents, and everything that we've been handed teaches us to not even think about venturing into that arena. That's why these topics are so difficult for people, and they want to call people like us crazy for exploring it, because it makes them uncomfortable.
Right,
it goes beyond their comfort zone.
Most of them, they have no background on that. So we have to start from zero to have them even start thinking and pondering on it.
It usually takes a big life event, like a big crisis. For some people, losing a loved one. For some people, injury and accident. I mean, it takes sometimes a huge crisis for a person to step back and re-look at reality. And hopefully that doesn't need to happen for people, and they can just have an open mind, because there's greater cosmic and universal forces that want us to be free of this matrix. But because the matrix is based on a reward system, people think of it in terms of, well, I won't be successful if I think in that way. I will lose my job. I won't make any money. And I'll have to, start from square one. And,
Fear.
there's a lot of fear. And it's understandable. And I have a lot of compassion for people that are coming across these topics. And so it was interesting to be born into this family that is considered presidential, this or that. And I was that child that was willing to not be connected to the money, the status, because this family has connected to much more. But they hid family members from these realities. And so Eisenhower was a spirit guide of mine since I was a kid. And he kept just saying, there's much more to this story. And
they keep you just not exposing to too many things when you were young. Yeah.
But I still have a big mouth.
So when you mentioned those cosmic forces, how are we going to connect with these good forces?
We have to be willing to just be authentic because it's very organic and natural. So it's just as natural as feeling hungry or wanting to cry or feeling, sadness or compassion for something. It's our willingness to be true to ourselves and say, when this comes up, I'm not going to block it because somebody else doesn't want me to feel it. So we have to give ourselves permission to be real, to be genuine to ourselves. Because when we can do that and not worry about what other people think, then we begin to knock down the barriers. Because if we think about it, men are taught to not cry. Women are taught to maybe, it depends on what culture we're born into, but there are certain requirements or there are certain standards that we are given. And a lot of it is important to live up to because it can help us to be healthy and to have integrity, but some of it can actually limit us as well. So I think it's important that we at least commit to having integrity and being about unity consciousness and showing each other love and respect. But when we feel an urge or a pull to go beyond what we've been taught, that we don't limit ourselves, because those limitations are the root of where we experience fear. The only reason we experience fear is because we're afraid to venture beyond what we've been taught. But we mistake that fear for being something that is dangerous, when actually it's something that could actually enrich us and help us to connect to our healing powers, our ability to move into our multidimensional awareness. And so fear, even though those triggers will still come up, we need to open the doorway up and not keep the door closed, because fear is a great teacher. It can help us to access our dormant DNA strands that we need to activate.
Oh, when you talk about DNA, we always hear this story. We have 12 strands of DNA. All 11 are broken, fragment. We are functioning on one pair, or one string of DNA. And why did it come up to 12? And I heard it from somewhere, I'm not sure it's from you or not, that we are a product of 5 pure tribes. That's why we have 5 fingers. And then there's 7 more hybrid tribes. So add up together to be 12. And then we have 12 strings of DNA in ourselves. How true that is? Did I hear it from you or who?
Maybe. Okay, well,
Yeah.
the numbers are similar. So
I want to look at my finger. It's not the same
Yeah.
anymore after that story.
So what I've come to understand, there are 7 root races. When we dropped into this lower harmonic
7
universe,
root race,
there are
not
7
5.
root races and
Not
5 cloister races. The 5 cloister races
What
are
is
the
that
star
word?
seeds. Cloister races.
What does that mean?
They're star seeds.
Starseed.
So
The star
what-
seeds
what
that have come
exactly
in to
then?
help wake us up. So they're the most advanced, right? So we have more of a connection to the star seed side of us than not. The 7 plus 5 is 12, but the 12, when we look at the higher strands of our DNA, 10, 11, and 12 is the higher harmonic universe that connects to Lyra. But it was still attacked by reptilians, right? So 12, which is 12 calendar years, 12 numbers on a clock, 12 stargates, 12
is a
zodiac
very
signs.
versatile number.
12 apostles.
Exactly.
Very versatile number.
But then the number 13 comes in. And in 2010, the sun started to move through the 13th sign of Fiacus. And we started to connect back into the 13. So when we look at the 12 apostles, the 13 was always Mary Magdalene, or at least, the feminine. And 13 also connects to the 13th gate, which is in the core of the planet, and the mother ark. And for thousands of years, that energy was not able to be in the planet. So the 7 root races, the 5 cloister races, were trying to be guardians of the ascension timeline, but the negative races like the Draco reptilians, the Black Suns, and the Sons of Belial came in and infiltrated everything and created these false power structures that demonized the feminine and put everything in reversal codes, so that we would digress as a human race and end up being in a new world order scenario where we'd be further enslaved, implanted, and further dumbed down.
So we're going backward.
So we'd go backwards, right. And it didn't happen. We actually made it.
So could I...
We're not in that...
From that story, I'm guessing the 5 are kind of the good ones, and the 7 maybe not so good.
They're good, but they've been taught to war with each other. They've been taught to fight with each other and create genocide. And so these darker agendas have taught these different races to fight with each other, right? So we see like the Aryans, like the Nazis, wanting to wipe out the Hebrews or the Jews and create this whole other system. These false Zionists that claim to be the Jews, and all these different imposters and what's happened. I don't want to, give too much attention to this particular region because I know there's a lot that are... Okay. But it's created imposters behind certain names of deities, whereas some of the most true ones actually exist around here. And the most powerful stargates exist in this particular area that connect to actually the infinity spiral that exists in our chakra system. So this is one of the most important locations. That's why I'm so honored to be here, because
Hong Kong, you mean?
Yeah.
Where?
Yeah.
Hong Kong.
Where?
Yeah. Well.
Where's the pothole in Hong Kong? Where's the pothole in Hong Kong?
Well, I don't know the exact location. Let's take our dowsing rod and find it. Right.
We are getting very excited because we never.
Well, we should all look for it together.
Where's the Stargate in Hong Kong?
Well, it's not far from here. But I don't know exactly where it is.
Is it beyond Hong Kong?
Yeah, well, okay, so the 8th and 9th are like Tibet.
Okay, it's not in Hong Kong.
Yeah. No, but it's all, these are all the ley lines of the thing that activates chakras beyond our, we only hear about our 7th chakra, right? Our crown chakra, which is very important. But the Buddha consciousness, the stargates that exist with the 8th and 9th that actually connect the Andromeda and Milky Way core exist in this region.
Small to the east, the Orient.
Yeah, and that's why it's a very targeted place. So that's why it's, I don't know how much I can say without us.
Well, let's see, when will we find that?
We'll find it.
Will you ever go and try to find that?
Yeah, why don't we all make a trip out of it?
Okay.
I'll go. I follow you.
Okay. But you need to stay longer here.
I would love to. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so as we come to terms with or get closer to the knowledge of other extraterrestrial races, we actually start to activate dormant strands of DNA, because these higher races are actually connected to higher levels of ourself. And the lower ones are only plugging into the places in us that are unconscious, right? So they feed on us and they take advantage and they encourage us to give our power away because they're very vampiric. They compromise their DNA on purpose to remain the controllers, because they were the original rebelliers, or the ones that rebelled.
We are the original rebellions.
Well, the original rebellions aren't necessarily negative, except some created a control system to feed on us because they never wanted to stay connected to the 0-point unified field. And they're part of this conflict that we're in because we're in a free will universe. But if we look at it like it's ourselves that are waking up, we can unplug and recognize that all those different forces exist within us. If we look at a tarot deck or the zodiac, all those lower entities and elements are a part of our own nature. And it's up to us to decide what we're going to align with. And it doesn't mean that the other ones go away. It means that they transmute and they become a part of it. So if we look at the 0-point unified field and we allow that to be the dominant force behind the decisions we make and the things that we do, these lower entities that want to control us don't have anything to plug into anymore. And so when we look at society and culture, most of it is about us giving our power away. But we do that within our own self when we negate our higher consciousness and our greater wisdom. We hand it to something else to decide for us. Or we attach ourselves to the money system or something that we don't recognize as corrupt because it looks good on the outside. And so waking up is really understanding like where we best use our energy and recognizing that we're one with it all too, so that we don't have to create an enemy. We don't have to see it as an enemy. We can see it as a part of our lower self that we don't need to attach ourselves to. It can be something we accept without it being the thing that makes or creates decisions for us. Like we can exist in a culture that's not very advanced and take the higher road and hang out at a temple. Like there's all these temples right here in Hong Kong, right?
So we went to 3 or 4 temples on the eastern
right. So there's
Island East.
Yes. So like you guys, you come from the higher place, and that's why you do the work that you do. Even though you wake up in a matrix every day, just like I do, we're not creating our reality from that level. And so we're a part of helping to activate humanity to do the same, which will help everything shift and change, which is why a lot of the crimes against humanity are being exposed, because a lot of people are choosing their higher nature over the one that allows these things to still exist, because they're unconscious to the fact that there's actually corruption that exists behind them. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, we're talking about a lot of tribes. This is probably part of this galactic human history. 星人歷史. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people will feel very, very bombarded by all these names.
Yeah, it gets confusing with all the names.
Right. Yeah.
So we better stop here, and then we go to the small studio because somebody is going to take this for a live program. Okay.
So the studio is being booked.